Welcome to this week's edition of In the Clubhouse with EMD Baseball. I'm Andy Kirakides, joined by my wonderful co-host Keith Glasser. How are we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. This episode, we are going to talk about preparation for on-campus visits as well as some general rules of etiquette. Where do you want to start this one, Coach?
I think we should start at just general prep for when you're going on an unofficial, an official, whatever it might be, when you're going to be sitting down talking to coaches. Do you want me to start?
No, I think this is one thing I think can really get you off on the right foot. If you walk into a visit prepared for that visit, starting with having some questions in the chamber, right? And yeah, I know your favorite question always was like, do you guys travel to Florida? We're not talking these surface level questions that you can get answered with a simple Google search. We're talking more pointed questions about the experience, how you might plan on developing a player. What does their fall practice schedule look like? What type of academic support is provided? How does that work with balancing classes and travel? More questions that are going to be more targeted towards how is that coach in that program going to help develop you? How is it going to impact you? What does life look like within that program? And players and families who show up to a visit and have this stuff ready to go, and they know what they want to get answered because they're trying to make a decision just as much as that coach is, right? If you come to a visit with a coach and you get to that campus, both parties at that point, 99% of the time, are interested in being a part of that program. The coach wants you there, and you're interested enough to spend enough time to go to that campus, sit down with the coach, and get a feel for what that place is like. Going up there and asking questions that can easily be answered with a little bit of research, you're not really getting your bang for the buck. So I think preparing yourself with questions ahead of time that are actually going to drive at how that coach, that program, that school is going to impact you is what you really want to get down to. And I think that from a preparation standpoint, that's probably number one on my list.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things when you're going on these visits is being able to sit down prior to. And I think it's something that it's hard to do when you're younger, but I think as you start to get recruited, you want to sit down and really start to kind of figure out, you're not going to know right away, right? But I think you need to sit down and start kind of figuring out what is important to you from your college experience and what does that look like inside that program? And then come up with questions that get you to those answers. So if if you want to come to RPI when I was there, or even if you want to go now and play for Coach Falcon, right? You're going to want to sit down and have a conversation or come up with some questions of, what does it look like to be a mechanical engineer and play baseball at RPI? What does that look like as a freshman? What type of classes am I going to be taking? What type of academic support do we have here? Are there academic advisors? Do we have study hall? What do class schedules look like? Is there preferential scheduling? Things like that kind of get you to the point of, okay, if I am a mechanical engineer, and let's face it, RPI, they're called the engineers, right? Some people think that you're the train conductor, choo-choo, but it's not. You're the actual, engineers, because that's what it's known for, is the robust engineering program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So, you're going to be supported from an academic standpoint when they're there. The school does a great job. The program does a great job. The athletic department does a phenomenal job as well. But those are questions that you're going to want to kind of decipher throughout the course of your recruitment, right? Like, hey, I'm going to go play. I potentially could go play at RPI. I want to be a mechanical engineer. How many guys on this team are engineers? Hey man, we have like 27 engineers. Okay, so like this is a viable thing for me to do. Because you could go to some schools, it's like, yeah, we have engineering here. How many guys are engineering on baseball? 0. Okay, so like, can you do engineering here, or is that going to be a rather difficult, tall task for student athletes to be able to do at this school. And that's going to get you an answer pretty quickly, right? Like you're going to know, yeah, I can do it here. Or, there's not a lot of dudes who are engineers here. Like, I don't know if this is really viable. And then from there, what type of, what does a day in the life look like? What does the practice schedule look like? What's our lifting schedule look like? What does, you can go on the internet and find what the baseball straight up schedule looks like. Yeah, they travel on spring break to go to different places and play games. They play Friday, Saturdays on the weekends in conference. They'll play a midweek game on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on how it fits into the schedule that week. Right. So like you can figure out all that stuff just literally by Googling said school baseball, and the roster is going to come up, the schedule, all of that. But what type of philosophy do you have? What type of coach are you? What's the team like? What's the culture of this program? Things like that can kind of clue you into things that you are either going to value at a high level or things that might not necessarily be of huge value to you. But you want to find some of the things that are very important to you and ask the questions that get you the answers that determine like, okay, these 5 things are super important to me. And at these 3 or 4 schools, all of the questions they gave me and they're recruiting me, like I feel very comfortable in these 4 or 5 schools. I just got to figure out which one I feel like is going to be best, because you're going to get answers on some of these visits, hopefully that are truthful, that are going to be like, it's going to clue you in like, I don't know if this is the place for me. I don't know if this is really what I want out of my college experience. And that's fine. Like the whole ultimate goal of this is to get to the point where you make a decision once and you're there for 4 years or 5, whatever it might be. Right. So I think that's one of the hardest things to do as a younger kid, because I think back now at 38 years old, like, I don't know. I know that I didn't do that. I don't know that I even thought of doing that. I just got recruited and went to the place that I thought was the best fit for me. Ultimately, like it worked out for me, but it wasn't, I didn't sit down. Like I remember sitting in Coach Recruit's office and being like, I'm going to be a history major because it's the only thing I'm good at in school. And, it just kind of all worked out for me. Whereas, I think nowadays with recruiting being a lot more robust, a lot more targeted, and you have the ability to have a lot more information on programs and colleges specifically, you can get pretty nuanced in what it is that you're interested in to make sure that you find the right fit, right? Because you don't want to get to a school and in the fall of your freshman year be like, this isn't the right fit for me, whether it's academically or baseball wise. And conversely, you don't want to get to a school and like after your freshman year, they're like, hey, it's not going to work out here. Like you should probably just jump in the transfer portal, or like you don't have a jersey next year. You want to make sure that you're going to be given an opportunity to be able to show up and compete every day and show what it is that you're capable of doing. And when you get those opportunities, hopefully take the bull by the horns and run with it. But, I just think that the prep beforehand, and I think for me, especially, and I say me, like for us on this side of the fence now, one of the best compliments that I think we receive is when, we talk to coaches after our guys go on visits. They're like, yo, that kid was squared away. Like questions were on point, really like went super in depth on what it is he really wants out of his process and his experience in college. Like that was awesome. Like that was a great visit for that kid, and I like, it means a lot to the coaches as well when you sit down in front of them, because it's like this kid has done his research. Like he's taken the time, the energy, and the effort to put forth a bunch of questions that are going to get him to the answers that he ultimately wants to get to. And it might not be that school, and that's fine. But that like you're going to leave an impression on a coach of like, hey man, when you call and say like, hey, I really appreciate all your time, but I've chosen to go to said school, be like, hey, listen, man, if it doesn't work out there, let me know. Like, love to have you here. Wish you the best of luck. If anything changes in the future, let me know. Because you know that kid is squared away and is good. So I think that it speaks to your maturity. It speaks to the type of kid you're going to be. It speaks to the fact that you're not going to be the likelihood of you being, having to have your hand held the entire time you're in college is a very low clip, which is a coach's dream, right? Like, we don't want to hold the hand. We have, if you have 35, 36 guys in your roster, you don't want to have to hold 36 hands. It's exhausting. Right? Like, you want a bunch of guys that can go about their business and you don't have to worry about the vast majority of them, because off the field, they're not going to be an issue. They're going to do everything they need to do in the classroom, and baseball wise, they're going to get after it. So it speaks to a lot of other things, like just taking that couple extra hours to sit down and figure out what it is that you want and the type of questions that you can ask to get you to the answers you want, can really shine through in the recruiting process, to where coaches will even like you more when you leave because you ask those questions, versus just the generic, like, so what do you do on spring break? Like, you can go on the roster, you can go on the internet and look at that, man. Like, ask me some in-depth stuff to show me that you actually care here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sets a tone for who you're going to be when you're on campus, right? And every coach wants somebody who's prepared and cares, right? Going through the motions on these visits and showing up and thinking that the coaches are just going to roll out the red carpet for you. Like, yeah, there are recruiting visits like that, but coaches want to see that reciprocated, right? Whether you're visiting RPI or you're visiting Tennessee, I'm sure Coach Vitello, when he gets somebody on campus, he wants that kid to ask him some tough questions like, hey, this is what I do. This is what I think I'm good at. Like, how are you going to develop me into a guy who's going to play professional baseball? What does that look like? He wants guys to ask him that question, because that's the type of kid he wants in his program. He wants the kid who wants more. He wants a kid who comes in, he's prepared, he knows what he wants, he knows what he's looking for, versus somebody who's just looking at gear and facilities. Like, everybody's got some version of something cool. So getting down to the substance and how that coach and how that program is going to impact you, and being prepared to ask those questions, and then being prepared to answer questions of a similar message, because coaches are going to ask you questions. If you've walked through the questions that you want answered, and you do it on the other side and rehearse, well, I would expect this coach to ask me some of these types of questions, and you've got those answers and you've thought them out, you're going to be able to perform better on that visit, because you've put in some preparation that allows you to be yourself and allows you to get the answers that you're looking for. Let's talk a little bit about etiquette here, because I do think that there's some things you can do to leave a good impression with a coach that don't have to do with necessarily your quote unquote preparation. I'm going to kick it off.
Sure.
Be on time.
Ooh, good one.
Right. Let's start from, the foundation of this. Like, if you're going to go meet a coach at 11 a.m. in his office, don't show up at 11:05. Don't show up at 11:15. Right. Pull into campus at 10:40. Get there on time. Leave on time. Mom and dad, leave on time. If it's going to take you an hour and a half to get to that campus, and your meeting's at 11, don't leave at 9:30, right? Leave at 8:45. Give yourself some wiggle room. You can always stop and grab a coffee at the gas station or wherever, Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, whatever your preference is. I like 7-Eleven, whatever. But
caveat to this, I learned this history lesson for everyone here on this podcast from the history major. 7-Eleven was the first company to offer coffee to go ever in the history of ever. Well, I shouldn't say ever, but in the history of the United States. My lone caveat to what you were saying, and I agree wholeheartedly with be on time. If you are running late, just communicate that.
If you're running late, just communicate.
It's very simple to just shoot a text to the coach real quick and be like, hey, we got jammed up in traffic. We're running like 5 to 10 minutes late. Like, okay, no big deal. Perfectly fine. Or like, you parked on the opposite side of campus because his dads were like, no, we know where we're going, and you're in the wrong spot. Like, it's okay. Like, hey, we're on the opposite side of campus here. Sorry about that. Like, we're working our way to you. Okay, no big deal. But my overall point in that is just, hey, if you're running a couple minutes late, just shoot a text real quick and communicate like, hey, we're running a couple minutes behind. No big deal. No one's going to get mad. just communicate that.
100%. The other piece of etiquette, don't try to think of the best way to put this. You don't need to show up in a suit and tie, right? But let's not show up in sweatpants and flip-flops either, right? So find that happy medium, right? Maybe it's jeans and a collared shirt. Maybe it's jeans and a t-shirt. Maybe it's jeans and a hooded sweatshirt. Like, I would never have any issues with that. But make it look like you might have taken a shower that morning. Just look presentable is probably the best way to put it, right? And just understand that whatever you present to that coach in that setting, that's the first impression you get, right? And it doesn't mean, like I said, it doesn't mean you need to dress to the nines. Like, if you're not a khaki and collared shirt guy, don't turn that on for a coach, because it's not who you are. But also, showing up in flip-flops with socks on and a pair of gym shorts in a raggedy t-shirt, like, it's probably not the best way to go either. So I'll leave that up for interpretation, but just remember that you do want to present yourself in a positive light, in somebody that looks like they kind of got their stuff together.
Yeah, I think the dress to be presentable piece is probably one of the bigger ones. And I would venture a guess to say even probably a must do for some of the older coaches out there who expect that, right? And I think that there are, there's certain programs out there. I mean, we played in one where, when we traveled with Coach Rakuya, it was dress pants and a polo everywhere we traveled, right? And there's like, you had to look presentable. You had shaving rules and all of those types of things. So I think just, throw on a pair of joggers and a long sleeve shirt and a quarter zip. You're going to look just fine. If you can do that, you can be comfortable. Ed, if you came and sat in my office, like, the likelihood of me wearing, I'm going to sound bougie, but the likelihood of me wearing ABC joggers and a Lulu shirt are pretty high. But, I dress comfortable, but I look presentable to where you don't look like you just rolled out of bed and are running 20 minutes late to get to school, and gym is your first class that you have to attend for that day. I think one of the other things too is, especially nowadays, and it's a weird kind of dynamic, like, leave your phone in your pocket or leave it in the car. Mom and dad can answer, or can take some pictures if you want to and text them to you. I think nowadays there's a lot of younger kids I notice, especially towards the end of my coaching career, like, their phone's out or it's buzzing the whole time with whatever, like, and it distracts from what's going on. So I think it's just one of those things, I think it's a generational type thing. I don't want to sound like an old guy. But it's one of those things where it's kind of distracting when you're, looking at your phone while we're trying to have a conversation about whether or not you want to come here for your next 4 years. And to me, it's like, I don't know if he's taking this serious with what we're talking about here. I think the other thing too is, everyone's on their best behavior on a visit, right? Like, you want the coaches to like you, the coaches want themselves, they want you to like them, right? So everyone's going to be on their best behavior, but I think being authentic is the best route, right? Like, you don't want to put forth something that you're not, but you also want to make sure that you hold the door for people. You say thank you. Just little things like that can clue coaches into, like, okay, this kid is, he's a good kid. He's going to be able to thrive in this program. And I've said this multiple times, where I've had kids on visits that, didn't necessarily treat their parents or their siblings all that well. And that was a complete red flag non-starter for me. And it's kind of one of those things where, some people will see it a little bit differently, but, it's how you treat mom and dad is a really big indicator on the type of kid you are and whether or not coaches are really going to want you in their program. And on the same hand, from a parent standpoint, like, how you guys go about the visit, like, you're being recruited too, so they don't want to bring in parents that they think are going to be issues in their program. And I don't mean that from inside the program. I mean that from, your son's not playing, so we're going to email the AD that this coach doesn't know what he's doing. My son's the best player here and he should be, it just creates more headaches. And if they get any indication of that, that could be a red flag for some coaches. So how you kind of go about the talking of things, we've talked about this before, the we versus me, and things like that. So I just think that it's something you should know. I've said this before on here, when people came into my office when I was at RPI, I'd flat out tell you, like, you are not allowed to talk to me about playing time. Like, I talk about it with your son all the time. They know where they stand. They know what they have to work on. Now, if you want to talk about his mental health and well-being, his academics, all of those things, by all means, please call me, email me, whatever. I will be glad to talk about any and all of this stuff. But when it comes to straight up baseball stuff, like, this is college, this is a meritocracy, this isn't, this isn't travel baseball, this isn't any of that stuff. So I think, drawing that line of distinction is, you have to understand what this is. And from a family and from a player standpoint, we've talked about this a lot, like, you're opting into an uber competitive environment, so, like, you have to understand what this is. So I just think the kind of how you present yourselves from a talking standpoint and a mannerisms and how you treat your family, it can be a very big indicator of whether or not coaches are really, will stay interested in you and or lose interest after a visit.
Yeah, it's something that every coach is going to pay attention to, because there's no reason to think that if you're going to treat your parents like that you're going to be easy to handle on campus either. The other thing I'll say on the parent topic is, mom and dad, you got to let the kid lead a little bit. Obviously, there's questions and there's time to have those conversations with that coach, and there's specific questions that you should be asking around, whether it's financial aid or merit money, like stuff that really concerns mom and dad. You're really there to try to get a feel for what your kid's getting into. Is this the type of coach and coaching staff in school that you want your kid to go to? But at the end of the day, the kid needs to be kind of leading the conversations. They need to be the focal point of the visit. And sometimes what can end up happening is that mom or dad will take over the visit, and it becomes a conversation between the coach and the parents the whole time, when, as a coach, I need that kid to step forward, right? So from a parent's perspective, I would advise to try to give some space. Let your kid kind of lead the way. Let them be the ones who ask a lot of the baseball related or questions that are going to impact them from a baseball perspective and a school perspective, right? It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be there actively engaged. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have questions of your own. But there's a turnoff that happens when the visit becomes about mom and dad and they're the only ones talking. So just be cognizant of the fact that it's your son or your daughter's visit. And obviously you need to be a part of that equation, but they need to be the focal point of it, and they need to be the one who are engaging with the coach. They need to be kind of the center point. I think that's really important, and something that people can often get wrong in the visit process is there's a time for the parents to be engaged and ask certain questions, but at the end of the day, they can't be the ones that are the focal point of the visit.
Yeah, I think that the last thing I'll add, and I think that this is becoming a little bit more prevalent at the Division III level, maybe not into the high academic world, and I don't necessarily know if we'll see it creep in there. But my advice, and it's not necessarily the etiquette piece, but I think it kind of plays into it a little bit. Or you go on these visits, and I've heard this at multiple institutions from coaches, where they're meeting with kids and then either before or right after the visit, they get deadlined by another school and then immediately commit to that school because they feel the pressure of being deadlined there. my advice on some of this stuff is, and again, I'm saying this because I don't necessarily see it being a thing that creeps into the high academic world, especially at the Division III level, right? Because look, like I'm recruiting at RPI. If you want to be an engineer, you have to take physics and get a pretty good grade. If you haven't taken it yet, your junior year, I can't put any deadline on you. Like I have to wait until you actually, have taken the class. We can see if we can actually get you into school. So it's a little bit more drawn out. But I think at some other schools that aren't necessarily the most high academic, I'm hearing some of these things happen. Take your time with this process. You don't have, just because a program has deadlined you does not mean that that they want you any more or less than they did 3 days before, right? Most people will probably tell you like, hey, I don't have a deadline, but what I will tell you is I can't wait indefinitely. There's going to come a point in time where if I haven't heard anything from you, I'm going to tell you that I'm offering this position to someone else. Because if you end up leaving and going somewhere else, I can't wait if you're my number one shortstop, I can't wait for 2, 3, 4 to also get committed and be out to my 6th, 7th, and 8th option. Right. So I think it's one of the things, like it's something where coaches are using it to put pressure on kids to be able to commit. And I think sometimes, kids are going on visits, they really enjoy a school, and then they get deadlined and they feel the pressure of like, well, if I don't make a decision, all of these offers are going away and I need to go to this school now. And, I don't know if it's the best thing for everybody. But I just think that there's times where, if you've taken 2 visits and you get deadlined immediately and you have another 2 or 3 lined up, like go take those other 2 or 3 visits. Like it's okay. You don't have, just because someone deadlines you doesn't mean you have to make a decision to go to that school immediately. So I just think that that's something that is you should understand throughout this process, that it's just because you get deadline somewhere doesn't mean that you have to immediately take that offer. And again, I don't think it's necessarily, part of the etiquette piece that we're talking about tonight, but it jogged my memory. And I don't know if there's another point where we can talk about this, and maybe we will at a different podcast, but I figured I'd throw that in there, that I think, I'm hearing about it more and more, at lower levels, which I think is, to me, it's kind of wild. And in part, I get it, right? I do understand it, but I think that, it's okay if one school deadlines you and you have 5 other visits lined up. Like you can probably find another fit, because who knows, maybe those other 3, like you go and visit those other 3 schools, like they might be a better fit, right? Like, just making a decision because, you like the school and they're halfway decent and they deadlined me, I got to make that decision to go there. Like that might not be the best decision in the long run. I don't know the answer to that question, but, I just think that it's one of those things where, if you're going on these visits and you have things lined up, unless it's, all the stars aligned and that's exactly where you want to go, then okay, I can get behind it. But I have a sneaking suspicion in some of these scenarios that, you haven't made a decision yet because you don't necessarily feel that that's the exact right place that you should be. And then you get deadline and it's all of a sudden like, yeah, that's where I want to go. Make sure that you're checking all the boxes and finding the places that you want to go to, and they check the boxes as well, and don't leave any stone unturned.
I agree. It's a tough spot to be in. I get it from a coach's perspective from a certain extent, but if you're not dead set on a school and you have other things lined up, sometimes it's just as simple as being able to tell that coach, like, hey, I really love my visit, but I got 2 more that I want to take. I'll make a decision shortly after that. A lot of coaches will, kind of give you some of that leeway, but, if you get backed into a corner, you really in that case, you really need to sit down and think of that. Is that place the best place for me, or do I have some other options that I need to pursue? And that's going to be individual conversation. And hopefully you have some people in your corner that will ask tough questions and really make you think about what that decision includes and, whether it's the right decision or not. But, these visits are important. And if at all possible, I think you should visit the school that you're ultimately going to go to. We're past the days of guys committing super early. And I think that the new rules have allowed guys to do some of this stuff with visits, being earlier in the process, opening up the door for guys to actually be able to get on campus, see a campus, meet the coaching staff. I think it's a huge part of the decision-making process. Every single coach that we've had on here, no hyperbole, every single coach that we've had on here in some way, shape, or form, I think we're over 50, we're like 53 or 54 interviews at this point. Every one of them has talked about the importance of having a connection with the coaching staff that you're going to play for. It doesn't matter what level you're going to be at. Division 1, 2, 3, junior college, it doesn't matter. Those men, and in some cases women, they will have a massive impact on you individually, and they will have a massive impact on your experience as a college athlete. And getting face to face with them is important, but then also seeing the environment that you're going to be in is incredibly important. And it's why we took the time to talk about this, not just from a preparation perspective, but some things that you need to consider from an etiquette perspective. But these are important pieces of the recruiting process that, if at all possible, you need to go through this. It's information that you're not going to be able to gather unless you get in front of that coach, you stand in the middle of that campus, and you get a feel for what you're actually going to be a part of. Because ideally, this is a one-stop shop, right? We know the transfer portal's out there, but ideally, you make one decision. You're there for 4 years. You're playing for a group of coaches that you trust are going to get the best out of you, that mom and dad feel really good about dropping you off at the end of August, your freshman year, and going, I know that he's in good hands, or I know that she's in good hands. It'll give you some peace of mind, and it'll give you the necessary information to make an informed decision about what the next 4 years of your life as a college athlete look like. Anything else you want to add, Coach?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. Tune in next week. We'll have another hot topic for you. Talk to you then. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.